So we start with a little aspiration sung to a tune. It's called a prayer. And basically it's saying two things. The first part of it is expressing, or for those of us in this room who already identify with being Buddhist, it's reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings, because it's his teachings that we're going to be talking about here. And the second two lines can be for all of us. It's expressing like an altruistic goal or purpose for our being here together to listen to these ideas. It's kind of like this, thinking this, okay, to listen for some tools. It's got to be practical. And the tools are to help us see our own minds more clearly, to help us identify what causes us misery, and to know how to change our minds for our sake, and then because we all live in this world together, so that we can be of benefit to others. To develop, as they say, a very nice saying in Mahayana Buddhism, so that we can develop the two wings of the bird, wisdom and compassion. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drobha shok sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drobha shok sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drobha shok. Well, I think this word attachment was in the titles of the talk somewhere or other, you know. And as Lama Yeshe says, you know, I could tell you about attachment for one whole year, and we will never begin to understand it until we start looking really deeply inside, you know, building something up inside. So actually, you know, the Buddhist view of the mind, and the fact is the mind is Buddha's expertise, is on the face of it is deceptively quite simple. And so when you study it, you know, you learn these bare bones names, the definitions, the categories, you know, they're very precise, the literature about the mind, you know. But then it's like learning anything. It's like you first learn the notes of how to play the piano. It is not possible, is it, to imbue it with the energy of Bach. You've got to practice 30 years. Well, it's exactly the same here. We can hear these words, you know. We can understand them intellectually, which we must do, like the theory. But then you can't force experiences to come, like with music, like with any expertise we want to develop. You start with the bare bones theories, and then by doing it every day, you grow. It grows inside. We know this, you know, but I think we don't sort of tend to think of spiritual this way. But it's no different. It's just the same. You learn the theories, and then you practice every day. So the first step has to be to understand the meaning of the words, you know. So there's this, as I said, this model of the mind. The Buddhist model of the mind is deceptively simple. These days I like to remind us of this. It was the Dalai Lama I was reading recently, and he said it was, you know, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began this incredible investigation into the nature of self. So in other words, they were these amazing psychologists. And we're not talking about neuroscience here, or we're not talking about the brain. We're talking about the actual cognitive process, the very thoughts and feelings and emotions themselves. That is the expertise, first of all, of these amazing Indians. And as we all know, Buddha came out of this extraordinary tradition. But these great meditators, these yogis, these skillful thinkers, these incredible, amazing geniuses, they're the ones who cultivated this technique that we know as single-pointed concentration, or that's known more broadly these days as mindfulness meditation. This marvelous, rigorous, disciplined psychological technique that enables a person to go to much more refined, more subtle levels of their own actual cognitive process. than we would even posit as existing in our materialist models. So and this is the type of effort and mental energy and discipline that the Buddha would demand that we employ in this job of radically changing our minds. And again, we're not talking about getting a scalpel to your brain. We're talking about recognizing, identifying the actual process of how you think and feel. That's Buddha's expertise, which is surprising to us. I mean, I think about the best most people think of Buddhism and Buddhist psychology is being mindful. Even most Buddhists think it's about that, you know. That's grossly superficial. It's unbelievably sophisticated model, and it comes from these amazing Indians. And so in their they were investigating what is the self, this stuff that we think we began 150 years ago with Freud, you know. Honestly, this is their topic. They talk about a self. That's their word, you know. And so, of course, these great Hindus came up with certain findings, their own direct experiential findings about exactly what the self is and isn't. And it's from there that Buddha diverged, because of his own investigation of his own mind, in the depths of his own mind, using these marvelous techniques, where he came up with various different views of the self. And that's where he diverged. And then over the centuries, there are indeed even various Buddhist schools of thought about exactly what is and what is not the self. And this is the long-term goal of the Buddha and all of the practices, you know, is to finally discover the nature of our own self. Meaning, another way of saying it, the nature of everything, of how things exist. That's Buddha's deal. So what he's saying in this model of the mind, what he's basically saying is that what goes on in our mind is the source, the main source of happiness and suffering. It's a very simple statement. So therefore, the job for the Buddha is to change the mind. And the reason he says we should change the mind is simply because he has discovered from his own hard work that the mind is a changeable thing. And so the crucial piece he's getting us to change is the category of states of mind in this simple model of the mind, Buddhist psychology. There are three categories of states of mind. Those that are called negative, those that are called positive, and those that are neutral. And these are not moralistic statements. And this is how we hear it. Because it's very interesting. You look, you know, before modern psychology came along, let's say in our Christian, you know, Jewish world, what we had was what's called sins. Isn't it? The 7 deadly sins, lust, whatever they call all these different things. Well, Buddha's dealing with the same stuff. So this is why we can't stand to hear about all that, because it seems like we've given up the idea of sins if we're no longer religious, and now we have modern psychology that talks about bipolar and psychosis instead. As if that makes us feel any better, I don't know, you know. But the Buddha's views haven't changed in this time, you know. He's the same model, using in a sense the same way perhaps the Christians talked, but very different understanding of exactly what these thoughts are, where they come from, and what we can do with them. So Buddha's incredible finding, the one key finding that is the basis of all his practices, is that all these negative states, and these are not, as I said, not moralistic terms, this is a technical term, for the unhappy, neurotic, fear-based, miserable, painful emotions that we all know so well, such as attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, low self-esteem, depression. These words we know absolutely spontaneously. Buddha's outrageous, radical finding is that these states of mind are not at the core of our being, and thus can be eradicated. That's what they mean by nirvana. Nirvana is not some place like heaven. It's the name you can use, speaking loosely, to refer to your mind when you've done the job of utterly eradicating these neuroses. That's what the job of being a Buddhist is. So that's the wisdom wing. Then we add the compassion wing to it, and that's where you become a Buddha, you know, in the Mahayana tradition. But the wisdom wing is this inner work that one needs to do oneself. And because one's mind is one's own, as far as the Buddha is concerned, it's not the product of anybody else. Our mind is not the handiwork of a mother or a father. It's not a physical thing. It is not a product of the genes, the DNA, the brain. They all play a role. We can't argue with that. But they're not a function of those parts of us, and it doesn't come from a superior being. And indeed, our mind doesn't come from nothing. So the bigger picture, of course, in Buddhism that is interesting if one really studies Buddhism in depth is that Buddha would say that our consciousness comes from previous moments of itself. It's this kind of continuity of mental moments. But the crucial point for the Buddha is that our mind, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, the neurotic ones, and the second category, the positive ones. We all know those. Love, compassion, kindness, generosity. These are not complicated words. This stuff is what we know in our daily lives. And these are the words we'll all use, unless, of course, we know, sophisticated Western psychiatry or psychology. Angry, jealous, depressed, low self-esteem, miserable, fearful, upset, irritated, annoyed, frustrated. They're all polite words for anger. All these words, we know them. They're just part of our daily life, part of our language. This is the stuff that Buddha deals with. This is the stuff that Buddhist psychology deals with. And the literature over the centuries coming back from these Hindus is vast. I mean, you would think there's only so much to talk about these states of mind. But the way they're described in the Buddhist model, when you study Buddhist psychology, you learn the epistemological model of the mind, which is the actual way these states of mind function. And I think Western scientists would be blissed out to study this stuff. It's incredibly sophisticated, really fascinating. And we're not discussing how the brain works. We're discussing the actual cognitive process of this stuff that is coursing through us all day, from the time we wake up until the time we go to sleep. Buddha's deal is to unpack and unravel and know this stuff intimately and well so that we can then start reconfiguring our mind and bring it into sync with what he says is our natural potential for a mind that it is in its nature pure. And what they mean by that is free of neuroses. But this is a pretty shocking concept. One of you might be a therapist, and if I come to you and ask you for methods to please get rid of all fear, all ego, all attachment, all anger, all depression, all pride, all jealousy, all low self-esteem, and develop infinite love and compassion for all sentient beings all the time, you would think I'm seriously mentally ill. Literally, would you not? Well, this is precisely what Buddha's talking about. But we don't hear it like this because we like to hear it as religion and mystical, which is sort of insulting, This is exactly what he's talking about. It's gritty stuff. Dealing with your own mind, And the only method, the only way to do that, you can go become a neuroscientist. You can learn about the mind. You can learn about what your mother did to you, what your father did to you, and your genes and your DNA. You can. But all Buddha says, you're missing the main thing, which is your actual thoughts and feelings and emotions themselves. As Lama Yeshe says, being a Buddhist is being your own therapist, but in this really precise way where you learn, first of all, by utilising concentration meditation, this marvellous technique these Hindus came up with, where you learn to focus your mind. And then with this focus, the deeper it goes, the better you do. And then based upon learning the Buddhist model, and we're not talking Freud's model here, you can use whatever model you like, but here we're using Buddha's view, his precise, detailed explanation of the workings of this consciousness of ours, and learn to recognize, begin to unravel and unpack this mind of ours, and then literally change it. So that's a curious point, because if we think about the stuff that makes us miserable, and this is the stuff that Buddha's talking about, that we can change. I mean, if you've got good stuff, why would you change that? The more of that, the better, please, So then because we're also addicted to believing that the negative stuff is unhappy feelings, we're addicted to feelings. But for the Buddha, feelings are just the tip of the iceberg. Feelings are when our body is involved. For someone like me in my life who's very volatile, it didn't take me long to know that I was angry because the words vomited out of my mouth practically simultaneously with the thoughts rising. So that was when my body was involved, the spit coming out the mouth, the eyes crying, the tears coming out, the irrational words vomiting out the mouth, the fist, punching, whatever. The body's involved. It's fairly evident to see a person's having some very strong feelings when they're angry like that. But a person who's a passive-aggressive, or a person who's got more tendency towards depression, you don't know that you've got bad feelings until you can't get out of bed one morning when you're practically inert. Because we don't notice we don't notice what the mind is doing until our body is involved. This is Buddha's point. He makes this crucial distinction between the body and between the mind, which is not how we think in our culture. So this is why, you know, when we start to use Buddha's technique of concentration, and even a little bit, don't have to get fancy with it. Just, you know, what you're doing in concentration meditation is for a few minutes, start with 3 minutes, be humble, you know, forget 20, it's ridiculous. 3 minutes is a good start. When you sit quietly, best to be quiet because we know we get distracted easily, you know, when it's not quiet. You sit in a comfortable chair, you close your eyes, you make a strong determination that you're going to pay attention to something like, for example, the breath at your nostrils. It's really uncomplicated. You're making a decision to pay attention to that for a given time, 1 minute, 2 minutes, and every time you notice your mind wandering off, you bring it back to you know, you renew your attention. This is called concentration meditation. You start somewhere. That's how you start. Something mystical about it. I mean, our communists could do it. So what you do, an inevitable result of this almost immediately, maybe would not be good concentration, because that's pretty stunning, the way they describe in the text how you would be if you get even some semblance of single-pointedness as they talk about it. It's astonishing. We don't posit such states as even existing in our culture. We have no techniques remotely like this. But almost immediately, the benefit of doing something like this is that you're stepping out of your own head. Because if you're sitting there, the thoughts, we all know from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to sleep, the thoughts are non-stop. They're racing, you know, uncontrolled, unedited mania. I think of it as unedited James Joyce. Non-stop. We all know that. We just think that's unconscious, you know. And 99% of the time, from the second we wake up, because we're paying attention to the outside world, to the thing, the breakfast, the sleep, the this, the hair, the shower, the getting in the car, we're completely focused on the outside world. We only notice what's going on in here when it's really strong. But we know it's going on, an undercurrent, constantly. So when you start this technique, begin even determination for 3 minutes, 4 minutes at the beginning of the day, with no expectations of anything fancy, just simply training yourself to pay attention, meaning training yourself to not follow every distracted thought, which is how we just do all the time. Then what you bring this skill to bear in your daily life. So first of all, when you sit down for 3 minutes, you do a little bit every day, they say one of the signs of success, in the text they say this, one of the signs of success of when you begin to do this type of focus is that you actually think you're getting worse. You think you're getting more, you've got more conceptual thoughts. No, it's only because you've noticed them. So what happens is in daily life then, and you're driving in the car, when mostly you just be unconscious or anxiously thinking about all the rubbish nonsense, but unconsciously, you know, because you begin to develop this ability to step out of the mess, you can't help but be noticing what you're thinking. You're not just noticing the car in front of you. And so when the car swerves and nearly hits you, you don't have a panic attack because you're observing your thoughts. And as you get better and better at this, guess what? You start to actually be able to control the thoughts before they vomit out the mouth. It's a practical skill. It's a practical skill. It's just not a skill we learn in our culture. And as soon as we hear about meditation, though, it throws us, and we make up a lot of fantasy ideas about what we think it means. It's a practical psychological skill of noticing what in the name of God you're thinking every day. There's nothing religious about it. It's intensely practical. And because everything that we do and say throughout the day comes from what is in our mind, then we had better learn to know the contents of our own mind. I mean, it's not surprising. But our trouble is, again, because we've got the philosophical and scientific view of the Western world that says, as a fact, that mummy and daddy produced me, that my mind is the brain, then we're not taught skills like this. Or if we are, they're taught as kind of weird and wacko, you know? And so then the only time we then do something about what's going on in our mind is when it's practically too late. When you have a mental breakdown and now you're exhausted and overwhelmed, you have to go find someone to help you. Whereas if you can imagine from the very beginning of our lives being taught that we have these millions of thoughts, that guess what? They're your thoughts. They're a cognitive process. They're your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions. Not just the, the response to someone else's unfair action, which is how we feel. We really believe, and again, this is part of our culture, we believe my anger is a source of your action. We believe that my happiness is a source of her action. No, Buddha says. They're just a catalyst. If you don't have the tendency to be angry, someone can punch you till the cows come home. You'll get a very bloody nose, but you won't get angry. If you have no tendency to be happy because you're addicted to misery, people can love you every day and it won't make us any kind of difference. You'll keep being miserable if you can't access the tendency to be joyful. People can love you and give you delicious things and stroke you every day. It won't make a difference. There has to be the tendency in your mind for anger, jealousy, love, compassion, kindness. And then the external world, for the Buddha, they're merely catalysts. It's a profound difference. For us, they're the main cause, which is why we go hungering after the delicious things and trying to avoid the ugly things, because we believe the delicious things are the cause of my happiness and the ugly things are the cause of my suffering. Buddha's very simple in stating, no, it's the other way around. What's in my mind is the source, the main source of my happiness and the main source of my suffering. And this is not like kind of a religious idea. For the Buddha, it's a practical one. And we have to learn to validate that from our own experience. But it takes time because we're so addicted to the other view, So we become victims, basically. That's the irony of ego in Buddhism. We're victims of circumstances, victims of other people's actions. The Buddha says our mind is the source. So that's why we have to learn to see what's going on in there, so that we can learn to identify, slowly learn to harness it and not vomit out everything we think, because we can see the trouble that causes. And then slowly, not just suffocate what's there, but have the courage to investigate deeply what is there with fearlessness. Because why? Because it's not set in stone. We can change all thoughts. And this is the point. The feelings, as I said, which is what we're familiar with, the feelings when they've hit the body, the feeling of anger, the feeling of jealousy, the pain of that grief, the feeling, tangible physical feeling. That's just the symptom of the actual problem, which is the elaborate conceptual story, the cognitive process, the elaborate conceptual story that informs that feeling. When we get to see our mind in that way and we start to hear these elaborate conceptual stories every day, then we can see we can reconfigure those stories. It's like learning to write a new script. It's like cognitive therapy, and I am not joking. Buddha's your best cognitive therapist to the subtlest level. Because one way he talks is, not only are these negative states of mind, this technical term they use to refer to these neuroses that we all know so well, not only do they have a characteristic of being deeply disturbing, one of the synonyms for a negative state of mind is a disturbing emotion. We all can see that, that's pretty evident. But the other one, which is really fascinating, which is really the key point that Buddha makes in his philosophical view of the universe and what is suffering and what is happiness, is that these unhappy emotions, as I'm suggesting, the feelings that we know about, which are the disturbing part, as we get to see our mind, to hear our thoughts more deeply, we're going to see that these emotions, these feelings are, as I'm saying, are informed by these elaborate conceptual stories. And as Buddha says, misconceptions. This is his key point. This takes time to see. And in Buddhist psychology, in the model of the mind, the way they describe it, there's like a hierarchy of these negative states of mind. And the root, one of the terms that's so delicious in English, I look in other languages, and I'm in different countries, and there's no really excellent word, excellent translation for this word, which is a perfect translation in English, for the Tibetan or the Sanskrit. And it's the word delusion. It's so interesting, this word. You know yourself, if you were accused of being delusional, you'll be really offended. Because you know someone's accusing you of being not in touch with reality. And I tell you, that is bullseye for the Buddha. This is precisely, and please hear me, precisely what he's saying the main function of these negative states of mind is. And this is a shock to hear this. Who would have thought we're delusional? We think we know we're disturbed sometimes. But you look at it. Look at a person who's out of control with their anger. It's not joking. Have a look. They're shouting, the eyes wide like saucers, spit coming out the mouth, completely irrational words, like the words of a mad person. Totally exaggerating, hysterical. They're having a mental breakdown, basically. But because they calm down and they become normal again, we go, oh, well, they were angry. But it's extreme. Look at it. But we take it for granted, you know. But if you listen carefully to the words, they're delusional. They're completely distorted assessment of an event, a thing, a person. But we're so used to anger, used to it, totally used to it. 1,000 times a day. And like I said, we have these very polite words for mild anger. Irritation, frustration, annoyed, you know. They're just polite words for anger, actually. And these attachment and anger for the Buddha, you know, in this hierarchy, attachment is the main voice of the root delusion that they call in Buddhism unawareness, ma-rigpa, or ignorance, simply ignorance, but it's got a very specific definition. And this is the deepest, most primordial, therefore the hardest to recognize in our mind. The delusion that is the source of all the others, such that when that is removed, then we have begun the achievement of what's called our nirvana, our liberation from suffering. But it's such a subtle state of mind, so primordial, so totally covering everything, informing everything we think and do and say. So extremely hard work to be able to plumb the depths of this one, you know. And this is in all the literature, as we know about the Buddha's teachings about emptiness, the wisdom teachings. It's dealt with there. So in this hierarchy, that's the root one. What it is, speaking loosely, is a misconception at the deepest, in the bones of our being, a misconception about the very nature of our own self. Like I said, that's Buddha's deal, you know. A completely fabricated, he says, a deeply ingrained, fabricated sense of I. It's incredibly subtle how, you know, and I mean, they study this stuff for 30 years in the monasteries and then go meditate for another 30 to begin to see it, which is what we have to do if we're following Buddha's techniques. Because this delusion, the root delusion, as Buddha's saying, is the one that is underpinning all the others. And so in this hierarchy, you've got this ignorance, this primordial sense of a neurotic I, which gives rise to the main voice, effectively the main cause of our daily suffering, and this is the one called attachment, which is basically this bottomless pit, first of all, of dissatisfaction, primordial, we're born with this, like addicted to misery, you know, dissatisfied, meaning no matter what we get, no matter what we do, no matter what we achieve, when it's never enough. This painful, aching feeling of dissatisfaction. This is the deepest function of attachment. On the basis of this, there's naturally this massive hankering after something, such that when you get it, it'll fill up that gaping hole. So the obvious first level of attachment is the objects of the senses. That's the most immediate and obvious one, you know. The next function of attachment after the hankering, then it does the job of looking for that object. And then when we get the object, the function of attachment, and this is the one that really makes it difficult, is that it causes, this attachment causes the object, the person, the event to appear far more delicious than it really is. And then the next part, which is simultaneous with this, and this is why it is so hard to understand Buddha's view that attachment is causing suffering, because for us it appears to be the exact opposite. This attachment that causes the object to look divine, coming from this deep neediness, this hankering, then what it does, this attachment, because it's a state of mind, it triggers very delicious feelings in the body. That's what we call happiness. So we're junkies for those, aren't we? We're junkies for good feelings. So as long as we spend the day and we've got a bunch of good feelings, which for the Buddha comes from attachment getting what it wants. The millisecond attachment doesn't get what it wants. The millisecond attachment is thwarted. That's the beginning, that second, of the state of mind, which is the exact opposite of attachment, which is called aversion, which is the basic bare-bones state of mind that informs what we call anger. Or, internally, depression. Or those polite words like frustration, irritated, annoyed, upset. They're polite words for mild versions of aversion. It's the millisecond that attachment is thwarted. Attachment is stopped in its tracks. Attachment's like this junkie that informs every single thing we think and do and say throughout the day. And it's a junkie only for the nice things. It can only bear the nice things. Another way of putting attachment, it's the main voice of this neurotic I, and it's a junkie to get what I want. I mean, it's very depressing to hear it this way. It sounds so evil. Buddha says this is what samsara means. Being in samsara is what he means by being by this stuff, being caught up in this stuff, which he says runs the show. So luckily we have the second category of states of mind, and they're called the virtuous ones, the good ones, the positive ones. They're called love, wisdom, intelligence, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, and they're our saving grace. They're how come we're sitting in this room as opposed to the gun club or something, you know. Really, this is the one. And Buddha's understanding about the mind, there's this kind of absolute clear distinction between what's called negative and positive, which sounds so religious to us, so moralistic, you know. It's not like that in Buddhism at all, because in Buddhism there's no punisher, there's no rewarder, because there's no creator, because he says we're the boss, you know. So these states of mind that on the face of it sound kind of cute, the Buddhist dealings of them, in the literature, the commentaries, they are vast. And this is the stuff of being a Buddhist. This is where you become a Buddhist. As Lama Yeshe says, you become a Buddhist when you start being your own therapist, dealing with this stuff in daily life. Forget about high stuff in the mountains. Ordinary daily life. Look at us, you know. And it's the harness, the recognizing, the identifying, and the harnessing of this energy that is the source of our own happiness. And eventually, as we progress, the eradicating utterly from our mind these misconceptions. Because this is the Buddha's point. They're delusions, they're misconceptions, they're not accurate assessments of reality. And that's not evident to us because we don't think of them like that. So it's unique to Buddha's take on these states of mind. You know, it's quite extraordinary, actually. So, you know, attachment, the obvious level is to the objects of the senses. But, I mean, we could see a deeper one would be to what I want. We can see that, you know. It might be attached to the chocolate cake, but the not getting of the chocolate cake is really not so much because it's not chocolate cake, it's because it's not what I want. So attachment is necessarily a voice of ego, which is really very depressing to us because this attachment, we don't really have an equivalent word in our culture, and if we do, we consider it totally normal. So much so that you could be considered abnormal if you didn't have it. And this is the shocking point that Buddha's making. If you think of it really simply, as I'm saying, these negative states, which we in our world, in our views of the mind, we give equal status to anger, attachment, jealousy, depression, pride, love, compassion, blah, blah, blah. These are just natural parts of a human person. And having a fairly even balance of these is you're a good person, you know. But to actually be as radical as Buddha, which we think it's insane, to say you can get rid of all the neuroses and only have the positive, this is too wacko for us. We can't imagine this. That sounds like serious mental illness, you know, really and truly. Because all our models of the mind would assert that these other states are normal human characteristics. So it's not easy to hear what Buddha's saying and to try and imagine how you could be if you didn't have attachment, anger, pride, jealousy, and the rest. It's just too strange for us. We've got to really give it careful thought and not just gloss over it, you know, if we want to take it seriously. So the deeper level of attachment is, you know, the Tibetans, if you've studied any of the Tibetan teachings, I think the Tibetans made this one up, I'm not sure. It's just a way of framing the deeper levels of attachment, and they call them the 8 worldly dharmas, which is the kind of weirdest phrase. But all it's dealing with are more subtle, more primordial levels of attachment, meaning not just to the objects of the senses. When we really have begun to harness our minds and learn to subdue our body, speech and mind, learn to lessen the neuroses and grow the virtues and become a marvellous person, the person we want to become, which is what Buddha's talking about, then we can really begin to see, when we start the compassion wing, learn these marvellous practices of how to become a bodhisattva, how to put others first and all this stuff, which is the unique characteristic of the Buddhism in Tibet. Then we really start to look at these deeper levels of attachment, which are indeed primordial. So there's a whole kind of genre of practices called transforming problems into happiness. So basically, what a problem is it not, is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So it might be a mild problem called the red light. But basically attachment wants the green light, so we get upset. So then to the most extreme example, where you might get cancer, or the hubby leaves you for a younger version. That's a more extreme example of attachment not getting what it wants, which makes it sound cruel because it's so normal. But the pain of getting what attachment wants, of not getting, is what Buddha's talking about. And so what he's saying is, and this sounds so shocking to us, that if we suffer, it's because of attachment. If we didn't have attachment to this or that, we couldn't possibly be angry when we don't get it. This is too shocking for us. It sounds like you're autistic or something, This sounds like you're really mentally ill. So it really needs careful looking at, because it's absolutely not the way we talk. So this deeper attachment is basically when we give up, it's learning to be happy, basically, when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And why would you want to do that? It sounds kind of perverted. Why would you want to be happy when you get the red light? Why would you want to be happy when you get cancer? Why would you want to be happy when you get sacked? Fired. We get fired, don't we, in this country? Okay. We get sacked in Australia. Don't you get sacked here? Oh, you do a little bit. Okay. Maybe. Okay, you get fired. It sounds demented, doesn't it? Because we know the nightmare of not getting what we want. We know the nightmare of thwarted attachment. So then why in the name of God would we want to be happy when we get miserable things? Well, it's very obvious, because the job is we're trying to rip attachment from the mind. And then it's easy to rip out the root delusion, ego grasping, and realise emptiness, achieve your own nirvana, add bodhicitta to the mix and become a Buddha, which is the goal, So you've got to be brave to do that. But we understand it in our culture. We call it seeing challenges. What do we say? No, what are we saying? Seeing something as a challenge rather than as opportunities, yeah. It's the same kind of deal. Or I always think of somebody like Lance Armstrong. I know he's a naughty boy now, but I know when I read an article about him in New Yorker 10, 15 years ago, I was amazed at he had sort of 0% fat on his body and this intensity of his effort, which is, that quality he's got, which is how come he, besides his drugs, I'm sure it's more than the drugs, how come he won 7, what do you call them? Tour de France. So anyway, I really admired. So if you think of him, he loved the high mountains, didn't he? He loved going up the mountain. He wasn't happy just floating down the mountain. That's making effort. That means that for him was better than just floating. So that's what we're talking here emotionally. But emotionally, you're considered mentally ill if you're happy or you practice being happy when a bad thing happens. But it's the perfect method, because if attachment's like a junkie, and there's a really good analogy for the Buddha, then we're junkies only for the nice things. We can only bear the nice things, which is why we go mad when the bad things happen. Either we become so depressed and despair because we can't stand it, or we go around killing everybody. This is because of attachment, Buddha says. It's so primordial, this state of mind he's talking about. So if we're trying to get rid of it, it's obvious. The quickest way to get rid of it is to not give it what it wants, and then be delighted when you've got this challenge. It's logical, but don't take on a job you can't do. You've got to be highly advanced to do that properly. So in that same genre of practices, they talk about these 8 worldly dharmas, which is these 8 kind of ways, or 4 pairs of ways attachment works at a very deep, primordial level that just runs our lives. And so one, which is sort of so obvious and it seems so mean to point it out, We're completely addicted to being comfortable. Nice feelings. I mean, the millisecond, my leg gets uncomfortable. Of course I'm going to change it, aren't I? I'll do like that, right? It's natural. The millisecond, the temperature is wrong. I mean, when we were children, we'd never heard of AC, never heard of heaters. You froze in the winter and you got hot in the summer. I mean, now you have a mental breakdown if you can't get the exact temperature, Or you can't get, once you'd order a cup of coffee. So now it's 180 degrees, whole milk with this and that in a proper cup, double this with 3.5 spoons of honey. Or otherwise mental breakdown, Isn't it? So this one of comfort is unbelievable. And it's the distress we would experience in a day just not getting comfort. The bus too crowded, the people the noise too loud, there's somebody shouting, the smallest things can distress us. We call it stress. Stress is attachment not getting what it wants and not able to bear it. That's all. Not that's all, but hear it. So then there's the last two are the ones that are really the most embarrassing, the deepest, most primordial. There's one lot that we are completely addicted to hearing nice words with our name in them. And completely addicted to not hearing bad words with our name in them. So we spend our lives, either one or the other. I mean, hear me. Is it not true? You can hear what a creep she is, and you realise that she is Robina. Look at the difference when you hear it. It's really astonishing, But the last lot, this is the worst. This is the one that, it's beyond embarrassing. And it's one that runs the universe. This attachment, they call it, such a boring title, you hear it, it's called attachment to reputation. But basically what it is, and we got born with this, and since we're tiny, we've been exercising it. We are desperate to be seen in a good light by others, and desperate to not be seen in a bad light by others. And this is the one that determines all of our choices. In fact, I think this one, it seems like it's the closest to this neurotic, dualistic, fractured, broken sense of self that Buddha says we have, which for him is broken, is a terribly painful sense of self. Ego for Buddha is not some big strong thing. It's like broken-hearted, bereft, lonely. The feeling of it is broken-hearted, bereft, lonely, fractured. Like ego is like being a nothing person. So naturally, the main attachment, where it's frantic to get the feedback, to have a person smile at us, to think a person likes us, to hear, to be seen in a good way. Since we're tiny, that's all we've ever been doing, So primordial, and I think even this idea of being seen by others and having is the basis of our view in the world, in our modern world, of that we're social beings and we need other people in order to become the person we have to become. So you can easily again so misread what Buddha's saying in his suggesting we have to give up this craving to be seen in a good light. We can't conceive of the opposite. It just sounds you're going to become some deeply mentally ill autistic person who doesn't need other people. It's really hard to hear it properly, because this addiction to thinking, this is the point about this attachment, it's an addiction to thinking I'm nothing unless I'm seen as something by others. It's so deep inside us, so primordial. Which is why the tiniest wrong reputation, the tiniest bit of insult is unbearable to us. We should ask logically why it should be so unbearable. We never question it, of course, because we don't question the deepest assumption, which is this sense of self, which in itself is delusional, Buddha says. Because essentially what Buddha's saying, I don't want to sound all new agey about it, But Buddha essentially is saying every one of us has this marvelous potential, please hear my words literally, for joy, contentment, fulfillment, compassion, empathy, kindness, all the positive qualities. Because technically, logically, when you study the Buddha's view in depth, we will see that all the positive qualities are necessarily empathetic. They're necessarily connected to others. Whereas the deluded ones are necessarily isolated, separate, concrete, lonely, bereft, like I'm nothing. Which is why we're so hungry for something out there, especially other people, to shine back at me. It's almost like the sense of ego is so distressing, the way Buddha's saying, that we need to look in a mirror to remind ourselves we exist. And that's other people. I mean, look at loneliness. Technically, feeling lonely for the Buddha would be the attachment to have other people around me to like me and talk to me and hear my thoughts and praise me isn't getting what it wants. So naturally you feel like you're nothing. But you've got to analyse. What is it about my thoughts that make them valid only when you hear them? Because that's what we feel when we're lonely. No one to talk to, no one to hear what I have to say, no one to share experiences with. We ought to question it. I'm not saying you should be alone. Don't say that, don't hear that. Because the Buddha's saying when a person has lessened attachment, they don't become detached and therefore what we think is not caring. No, a person who's less attached is a person who's more content. That's the opposite of attachment. Content. Not lazy, kind of stick your legs up, content, eat the chips and watch telly. No, emotionally content, fulfilled, content, less neurotic, less angry, less depressed, not lonely. That's very hard for us to hear, because that's a job that you do in your own mind. You work on yourself to accomplish that. It's an inner job. Don't think inner means mystical. It's practical. What time is it? Huh? What time are we supposed to be out of here? 9 o'clock. Oh, we have a whole hour. Okay, talk to me. Come on, ask questions.
One thing I'm struggling with, I teach kindergarten to 8th grade students, and from 5 till about 14.
Okay.
And I find myself this idea between discipline and compassion.
Yes, of course.
And it's like, I know the story. It's like, all right, you see the child, hand, fire, but you're talking about teenagers and social media. And at what point I want to show compassion yet discipline, and trying to find that line. Sometimes it's difficult.
Of course, I can't even imagine it. I can't imagine being a parent. Forget about being a teacher, And this sounds like a simple answer, but it's really not. It's obvious that the more you understand your mind, the more skillful you are with yourself, the more wise you will be in seeing their mind and knowing one moment you'll give them a hug and next moment you'll shout. But that's coming from your confidence and your wisdom, which comes from your hard work on your own mind. And that's not an easy job. I mean, I can't imagine how difficult. And the thing is also, you just can't get it right sometimes, because some people, no matter what you do, they won't behave the way you want. So I don't know what you do. What do you do when it's completely uncontrolled? What do you do? Just ignore them?
No, I take a deep breath. Like,
but what do you do with them, the ones who keep not being disciplined? What do? You throw them out?
No.
Call the police? I saw that lately. You call the police?
No.
You don't call the police? Okay.
But you talk about seeing their minds, and I've known them now for a few years.
Well, there you go. You know them well.
And stuff, and I just know what triggers them and what doesn't.
Yes,
and
of
say,
course.
like, for some of them, take a walk, and for some of them, just take a few breaths.
That's right.
Everybody's different.
Sure.
But I try to what helps me is every night I go through the day and say, how could I have done this better?
There you go.
The words,
Perfect.
the tones, and
Perfect.
everything. And then sometimes I feel
I
like
think
I'm
it's
making
perfect what you're
progress,
doing.
and sometimes I feel like I'm getting nowhere.
Darling, I can't imagine, but I can't imagine how difficult it is. How many children do you have?
Like 196 students.
All at once?
Well, no, like 5 days a week, 8 hours.
Sweetheart, I think you're so courageous. And you go home every day and look at how you could have done better. You're incredible. You should be rejoicing in your hard job, darling. You're doing magnificently. Yeah. Because remember, though, you see, this is one of our biggest problems. Let's say you've got a really neurotic brother, and that no matter what you do, he's not going to get better. We tend to think we didn't do the right thing because he didn't get better. It has nothing to do with you if it's not perfect every day at school. If you cannot do more, then their not behaving well is no reflection on you. It might be, and so you look at yourself at the end of the day, but we shouldn't judge what job we did by how they are, because sometimes some people just won't change. Do you understand my point?
Yeah.
And you can't make it all perfect, so be content with what you can do. That's really important.
Thank you.
Somebody else? Yes.
Can you share karma?
Can you do what?
Can you share karma?
Share karma. What do you mean by karma? What do you mean? I mean, everybody uses this word differently. What do you mean by it, darling?
Well, you just said...
Use the mic.
You just said she couldn't be responsible for what happened in her
Well,
classroom.
you can only do so much, can't you, to change
Right.
other people?
So is the principle that you can't share karma.
You're going to have to tell me what you mean by karma, though. So give a little definition.
In the case of action, in other words, karma means action.
Uh-huh.
So then the person's actions are a result of their previous actions.
Yeah, so then sharing...
So she's trying to help, right? So you're telling her she's doing such a great job, and to release herself from the idea that you can't share karma is what I'm saying.
Okay, I just wouldn't have put it that way, that's all.
Okay.
But that works for your mind. I mean, I just say the way I'm saying, and if this is what you mean, that if you've got your alcoholic brother, and no matter how hard you try to help him, keep the mic.
Okay.
No matter how hard you try to help him, your compassion might be limitless, but he still doesn't change. What we tend to think is, oh, I'm a failure because he's still the same. So if you mean by that we don't share karma, then that's fine for you, but I wouldn't say it that way. But thank you. Yes. Somebody else? Any old point, anything you want to discuss? Yes.
Thank you. So I'm sort of starting in this. I'm a beginning Buddhist.
Beginning Buddhist. Okay, I am too, darling.
I was doing a little bit of the reading that my partner gave to me, and it talked about karma, and so I had this question about karma. And I was all nervous that you were going to ask me for a definition because I don't have one. But I as I was reading about karma and sort of understanding that our actions lead to I guess in the future.
I understand.
The good things we do, the bad things we do, so
Yes,
forth.
yes.
So excuse my confusion.
Go on, don't worry.
So I noticed something that's happening subtly in my brain. I started thinking like, oh, I better do the right action so that my future will be better.
I understand. Okay.
So
is that good or bad, you're saying?
Right. I mean, I'd rather have authentic feelings of doing
Sure.
good for others and being
I understand.
compassionate as opposed to like securing my future.
No, it's a very good point. It's a very good point. I remember His Holiness Dalai Lama would often say, I remember one time, the teachings in Buddhism, the way the Tibetan packaging of all the teachings, the compassion teachings are like university level. They're like advanced. And that's not how we tend to think. We tend to think of spiritual teachings as about compassion. But actually, the Buddhist view would be the wisdom wing, which is all the nuts and bolts of knowing your mind, like we're talking here, and indeed discussing karma, which we haven't yet discussed. This is fundamental, and the main purpose behind this is indeed for one's own sake. We've got to first recognise what my suffering is, what causes me suffering, want to change my mind because I'm up to here with suffering. You've got to have that. It's like compassion for yourself. They don't say it that way. That it's really important. And then the Buddhist view would be that when you know why you suffer and your neuroses, then you can have compassion for others. Do you understand? It's
I do.
really powerful. So I remember when I first heard all these Tibetans talking about bodhicitta and these outrageous levels of these great bodhisattvas. They're like saints, basically. And for me, it was so outrageous what they were saying. The levels to which the Buddha says we could accomplish compassion and love for others. I thought they were out of their brains, you know. I couldn't get a handle on it. It seemed too much, you know. So I remember then reading His Holiness say, if you want to help others, practice compassion. You want to help yourself, practice compassion. I often would say, if you're going to be selfish, be wisely selfish. Help others. So of course, the Buddha's point is this, that right now we're following attachment and anger and depression and low self-esteem, which are completely, obsessively self-centered, only because we're desperately trying to get what I want, but in the end it brings the opposite. So at least by giving up attachment for your own sake is a step forward.
Gotcha.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
It's a logical thing, seeing that anybody, you can look around your friends and you see some people are very self-centered. You know, nobody likes them. They don't get along with anybody. Their life's miserable. But look at someone else you know who's kind to others. People adore them. So you can learn from that. It pays to be kind, but you don't do it with a manipulative view. It's practical. And often His Holiness talks to countries, often especially anyway, he talked to the United States government people and say, you know, can't you see the advantage to you of being kind to your neighbours? It's obvious, really. We can just get that, you know, because when you're selfish, you can't get it. True. So there's a very practical aspect of that. Do you understand?
I do. Thank you.
So be happy to do it so you get good results. Nothing wrong with that.
Thank you very
much.
much.
And then eventually it'll become altruistic, one step at a time.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hold on one second.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
What's the best way to begin to change bad habits that you keep saying you want to change,
darling,
but you don't change them every day?
Oh, sweetheart, I know. It's very depressing, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm still trying.
Same old, same old.
Old habits die hard. Our mummies told us this. So part of it has to be, we've got to be very honest with ourselves, very humble, very accountable, and see what our deep old habits are. But we have to first recognise how they cause us suffering, not just feel guilty. That's useless. You know, recognise how they keep us stuck, and then be realistic about what we can and can't change. So you make a decision. You do your best, and you're going to fail again, so you pick yourself up. I mean, you know, it's a long while, and if we understand, certainly the Buddha's view, taking his view, that it's going to be quite a while before we really get to where he says we can get. So it's long-term patience, which means first confidence, but a lot of humility with ourselves, because we tend to love to beat ourselves up and don't want to kill ourselves because we failed after the second time, you know. Slowly, slowly, darling. Really, it needs kind of, on the one hand, courage, but on the other hand, kind of a soft, a gentle touch with ourselves, but both. And it takes time to break. But the point, I think, is this one. Okay, I'll tell you myself. In my life, because I'm a volatile type person, like I confessed already, you can see, anger was one of my strong habits as a child, you know. And I think even after I'd become a Buddhist, many years, and I really had confidence in the Buddha's teachings, in the logic that there's nothing in me that I can't change. That, for me, I felt very powerful. But still, it took me years before I had some sense experientially of the truth that anger wasn't my middle name. Do you understand? Yeah. So we've got to, naturally, you've got to have confidence in the theories first. Because if you don't have confidence that recipe will work, you'll give up after the second try. But if you're really confident you've got the recipe right, you might fail 10 times, but you will keep doing because you're confident the recipe's good. But if you don't think even the recipe's good, you'll give up. So you've got to first have theoretical confidence. And that's what I find powerful about the Buddha's teachings. I like to study the logic of it and listen to it, because it's not just hippy-trippy, cross your fingers and hope for the best. So when I knew, I was confident that anger, jealousy, these things are not at the core of my being. That was very compelling for me. But it takes a while to begin to taste the truth of that. So we just keep picking ourselves up and keep moving. Keep trying. We all know practice makes perfect. Really, it's a profound statement. Does that make sense?
It does.
Good girl. Be confident. Yes, sweetheart.
I have two questions, but I'm just going to ask one. One is an emotional one, and one is an intellectual one.
Okay, go on then.
So I'm going to go for the intellectual one.
Go,
I'll ask
honey.
the emotional one.
Go,
later.
Dezan.
I'm piggybacking off of this gentleman here and off your other night, and I'm going to do it with a little prelude. There is a wonderful documentary by the Nadeau brothers, I think, a French...
The who?
Nadeau brothers, who just happened on 9/11. They were doing a documentary on a firehouse on 9/11. So they captured
Okay, right.
the whole
Yes,
thing.
amazing.
And it's an amazing document
Okay.
of that day. And
Yes.
one of the things that they showed was the firemen arriving to those burning twin towers.
Yes.
And the look on their face, and they knew they were walking into certain death.
Yes,
they
exactly.
knew they weren't going to come out
I
alive.
understand. Yes.
So my question now is about organ the idea of organ donation, and
Yes.
that I think you said that you were against it because
Okay, go on.
yeah,
Finish.
because that it would sort of screw up your karma or something. Screw
Okay,
up
no, not like that, not like that. No, what Dezan is referring to is in one of the teachings we had last week or the week before, whatever it was, discussing the death process. And there's this book that I finished editing of Lama Zopa's, which is actually coming out from Wisdom next year, but is available now from FPMT as a downloadable ebook. There's a chapter on what, certain things, what to do when your loved one dies, what to do if they die at home, in hospital, and there's a chapter, what to do if your loved one gives their organs. And so all the lamas, the Tibetan lamas would say how amazing to have the compassion to want to offer your body to others after you die, that it wouldn't disturb your mind. And the Buddhist point is, it's really crucial to die peacefully, because that helps activate a virtuous karmic seed, which will then throw you, as they put it, into another human life. That's a big deal for the Buddhists. So the point about the organ donating, it's a practical thing, that, that actually they keep you breathing on the table as you're cutting out the organs. And the Buddhist point is, when you've stopped breathing, you're not dead yet. The mind can stay there for several days, and it's a fairly easy thing to do to check if the mind is still there, even though the mind is more subtle. And that can be extremely disturbing for a person. And, because often there are many stories of people, there's this marvelous book I just read by this American medical journalist called Nick Teresi, and it's called The Undead. It's not about zombies. He's amazing. And it's really all these wonderful discussions that are coming up now, and many contradictions among all the doctors in this country about just exactly when is life and when is death.
This is my question, though.
So-
The way I would imagine that I wouldn't have the courage of those men. I'd look up and go,
Which
I
men?
was a fireman.
Which
firemen were going to
Yeah,
save
but I don't
other
get how
people.
what's got to do with your organ donating.
Well,
what's got to do with
in other words, I would
donating?
think the act...
What?
The act of disturbing your death process to save another person
Oh, that's
would
not the way
overrun-
to think about it at all. That's not what's being thought here. That's not the point.
And I guess I don't understand it, because
Then
I would think it would be an
no,
act
darling,
of
listen.
such-
A person who gives their life for another, that's incredible. The people who walk up the stairs instead of ones who are running down, you can only rejoice in their unbelievable compassion. Of course. Unbelievable. So you could say a person who has consciously is doing that. But when you're already dead, you've got no control. You're not a highly realised being. So if you're sitting on that operating table and you're still alive and they're cutting your entire torso with a great big saw, excuse me, you don't have much control then. So it's not a question of, you should give your life for others. It's marvellous that you do, but there's no control. You're dead already. But your subtle consciousness is still there. Whereas if you're running up those stairs full of compassion, or like mothers do for their children, you're very conscious. So it's not a question of being selfish. It's not a question of that. You can't hear.
No, because I think you've made the decision. You've checked off, I want to be an organ donor.
Of course.
So therefore, your
if you have, how
intention is
marvellous.
there.
But if you still have done that, that also doesn't mean that your mind won't freak out when they cut your organs out, which in Buddhist view would cause you to have an intensely suffering life. So what good is that to anybody? What good is that? I mean, the whole context here, Dezan, she has such interesting questions, this woman. Wait, just a sec. The point there, darling, we'll talk about tomorrow, just not tonight.
Okay.
Yes, and yes, okay. You're missing the point completely, you and your intellectual questions. She is very intellectual. Nothing wrong, intellect's good. Yes.
I'm struggling with trying to understand your message right now.
About attachment.
Now, the thing...
About attachment.
Yeah.
Which one are you wanting to understand?
Actually, I have a belief, all right? My
But
belief is
cut
that
to the
everyone...
chase. Just give me the question.
What?
Sweetie
The
pie.
question is...
Give me the, I
do
forget
you
your name.
believe-
I forget your name. So sorry.
What?
I forget your name.
Alan.
Alan. Give me your question, Alan.
Okay. Are you, as a Buddhist
None.
teacher, none,
Person, yeah, I'm a nun.
you're doing something, you've committed your life to doing something that you believe in? That
No,
you're-
I don't believe in it.
You don't?
Never mind. Go on.
Okay. All right.
Go.
I'll talk for myself. all
Yeah,
right?
Alan, go on. Just ask me
I've
the
been-
question, Alan.
I believe that every human being
Yep.
has a calling
Okay, good.
to be of service
Okay, good.
in the best way they can.
Wonderful, yes.
And when they find that calling,
Yep.
and if they pursue that calling,
Yep.
if everyone were to do that,
Yep.
the world would be a beautiful place.
Oh, honey, I agree with
All
you. So what's your
Okay.
question?
The question is, when a person feels like myself,
Yes.
I feel I have a calling
Yes.
to be of service
Yes.
as an artist,
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
But I'm not being accepted.
I
or I'm
understand
not
that, darling.
being-
It's very painful, Alan. It's very painful because there's only so much we can do if no one wants to see us or hear us. I agree, darling. So you've got to persevere and be humble and patient. There's no choice, is there? We can bring a horse to water, we can't make it drink. It's difficult, Alan. Like we talked before. We talked last week, he and I. It's difficult, darling. There's no answer to it. You
Yeah.
can't force a person to want your art. You
But
can't force a person to believe you or like you.
Okay, now there is a comfort in my belief system, and maybe
good,
it's
darling, go
wrong.
for it.
All right, is that my physical presence right now
Yes.
is going to end at some point.
Yep.
Right.
Yep, sorry.
And it's not, but there's another part of me that's not going to end.
Okay, darling,
It's a-
good.
You know,
Yes.
but I guess forgiveness
Yes.
is, when you've been turned down, or
Yes, Alan.
you're not getting the response
Yes,
you
darling.
think you'd
Yes.
like.
Yes.
How do you encompass?
It's not easy, darling. Life is tough. Haven't noticed? Life is a nightmare. People do mean things to us. People kill us and torture us and rape us and lie to us
Right.
and don't like us. Honey, this is life. Join the club. Give the microphone, darling. Alan, you and I have talked before. Yes.
Hold on. I was wondering if in a former life Pope Francis was a Buddhist or is still a Buddhist?
I don't know, maybe he was, the Buddhists would say. I mean, all I know is I've got a Jesuit priest friend. He said, Robina, maybe I'll be a Buddhist in the next life. So who knows, because Francis is a Jesuit, isn't he, So he might harbour ideas of reincarnation. Who knows? Yes. Yes, sweetheart.
Hi, I just have a question from my heart.
Yes.
Which is, do you feel like giving a personal glimpse of the Holy Lama Zopa of all the...
What do you mean, darling?
Well,
A glimpse.
You have such a shall we say, a very special perspective. And I just wondered if you give a glimpse, just anything that comes
A
to
story.
you.
You mean about Lama Zopa?
Yes.
Well, he never sleeps. He meditates all night. He's tough. I mean, he's my Lama, so I can tell you stories like you go and ask him a question, he looks at you and says, what are you asking me for? Or he might ignore me completely, or he might go, well, I don't mind what you do, as long as you do what's most beneficial. I can tell you stories like that, or I can tell you gentle stories, but I usually see the rough stories. That's obviously what I need, I mean, I feel a bit embarrassed to answer that question. I don't know much about Lama Zopa. I know he's for me, he's my teacher, I can say that. He's my example. And I can give you examples of his outrageous behaviour, which is beyond what the world thinks is normal, like never sleeping. That doesn't sound possible. And they say that, if Roger, his attendant, said that for Rinpoche, sleep is a disgusting waste of time. Now, I mean, to hear that among ordinary people like you and me, it's kind of like, excuse me, where's that coming from? All that indicates is, if you look at the teachings, this is what I said when I first heard the teachings, the levels of compassion that we can accomplish according to these teachings, for me, when I heard them, were insane. But I would suggest when I see this person, I see them embodied. So that gives me more confidence that maybe one day I can be like that too. It shows you what you're capable of, but it's kind of like out of the realms of a normal person. You have to deduce there can't be attachment there. You have to deduce that's what it would be like. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So I can say that.
Thank you.
All right, darling. Thank you. Yes. Here. And then you. Okay, you next. And then you, darling. Yeah, okay.
I'm also.
I can't see you.
I'm right here.
Okay.
I'm also fairly new to these
Yes.
ideas, but
Yes.
something that I've been confused about is the attachment to the desire to become better and
I understand.
make it, you know,
No.
like, so this, for example,
Yes.
this morning I was practicing concentration meditation and
Yeah.
it wasn't going the way that I wanted,
Right,
so
of
my
course.
attachment was thwarted in what it wanted, but
That's right.
normally the solution would be to eliminate that attachment,
I
but
understand.
don't you
Listen,
need
okay,
that?
okay, yes.
Yeah.
So if we look at the model of the mind, we have to be distinct and clear about what is attachment, what is wanting something, or what is love and what is attachment, or what is attachment and what is liking. There's distinct characteristics for the Buddhist psychology that these negative states of mind have, and attachment is one of the most primordial of the negative states. It runs all the others. If you didn't have attachment, you wouldn't have anger, you wouldn't have pride, you wouldn't have low self-esteem. This is logical, so it's a stunning state of mind. But given that it pervades our lives, given that we're so totally addicted to it, it is the default mode. It's way to go, baby, before you get rid of it. So you have to first recognize what it is, and then recognize the depths to which it does run our lives without, but recognizing it's a long-term goal, So what you could say, though, in the Mahayana point of view, there is an approach that would say, given that it's a while before you get rid of it, then you can still be skillful. So at least don't be attached to things that'll harm you, like bad friends, abusers, alcohol, things that'll destroy you. At least be attached to something that'll help you. I mean, that's skillful means. Eventually, you'll go beyond that attachment and you'll do it from genuine altruism. But to expect ourselves to be genuinely altruistic, it's too much to ask. It's not possible, So it's to be skillful. But we still have to learn to know exactly what it is and see what it causes and how it is such a primordial mistaken state of mind. But way to go before we get rid of it. Are we communicating?
Yes.
But the other crucial point is this. What's labelled attachment is the name for a delusion. But there's another word that we can say, you aspire to something. I want to walk out the door is a valid, normal state of mind. I want to walk out the door. You've got to say that word before I walk out the door, isn't it? So you could say, wanting to walk out the door is a valid, reasonable thing to do, but it would be attachment if, when you get in my way, I get upset with you. That proved I not only wanted to walk out the door, I was attached to walking out the door. That's the difference. Like if you and I go out and order chocolate cake, may we have chocolate cake? Oh, we'd love chocolate cake. It's completely fine aspiration, but the proof whether it was attachment or not is when you get carrot cake instead and you get upset. So we can't tell the difference between attachment to something and merely wanting it. It's too subtle. But the best time to notice it was attachment is if you get upset when you don't get it. That's the proof it was attachment. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's a very powerful way to look at it. But given it's going to be a way to go, honey, before we get rid of it, it goes to profound depths. Do you see?
Yes.
And the more you know your mind, the more you're going to see it more clearly and distinguish it from other positive states of mind. And of course, the other aspect is in the Mahayana path, we consciously cultivate very positive, virtuous, altruistic aspirations. Before you shove the food in the mouth, you will think of offering it to others. So at least you create some virtuous thought before you then fulfill attachment's needs. There's a skillful way of practicing developing new imprints in our mind. It's very skillful. Do you understand?
Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. And over here we have a few, over the front here, this lady, and then the man behind, and two ladies.
I
Yes.
just, it's kind of this,
Yes.
just to sort of
Yes.
piggyback on that,
Yes.
just to try to understand that last bit that you
Yes.
said about offering it up.
Okay.
and-
So let's, if we understand Buddha's view of attachment, it's a bit depressing this. It's the cause of even being born in a human body in the first place. Buddha actually calls this a desire realm. The way that you hear about how we die and how we get reborn, I mean, Freud would have really liked it. It's described in great detail in all the Vajrayana texts because we are driven by this attachment. And so when you die and you go into this like a dream state, like intermediate state between lives, this is how they describe. And then you, at the time before when your new mummy and daddy in this life hopped into bed together, and that time the karma ripened between you and them, the Buddhist text would say your consciousness from the past life ran like a magnet, driven by intense sexual attachment to your daddy. And then you get to the egg and sperm, and all you see is a sex organ, and that makes you angry, and that causes you to jump into the egg and sperm and become the new you. And if you're going to be born a boy, you're driven by powerful sexual attachment to your mummy. And as Lama Zopa politely says, you can see very clearly how attachment is the cause of this realm of existence. I mean, this is Buddha's take on the whole thing, his big philosophical picture. So attachment is primordial, and it is the cause of having even 5 senses. What else are the 5 senses? But they're driven by this. The attachment within us in our mind is craving every second to give these 5 senses what they want. If we deprive our senses even for a few hours, we go mad. So we are in a desire body. It's primordial. So given that we're driven by attachment, the default mode, then the Mahayana view is, as a skillful means to kind of bypass attachment, and before you mindlessly shove the cake in, before you mindlessly leap into bed with a new boyfriend or whoever it is you want to leap into bed with, and mindlessly have all that bliss, you attempt to have some awareness, you attempt to want to offer yourself, be kind, be generous, you imagine offering the food, and then you go and eat it. But those few thoughts of imagining offering the food, Buddha says every thought we have sows a seed. So you just sowed bucket loads of virtuous seeds. So if you are living with a partner and, you're tired tonight and they want sex, then, the deal is if you're living in the bed together, that usually means sexual activity, and you don't want it. Yes, darling, I'd love to have sex with you. And you offer yourself. How kind of you. That's really compassionate. We don't think that way, do we, I don't feel like it. No.
I never think like that.
What? We never do. I mean, that's a profound way to make your action of what would normally be attachment an incredibly generous action, especially if you don't feel like it. I mean, I'm really serious. You can think of it, because it is attachment. It's so excited, but because we both want it, it's so delicious. But, I mean, look how disgusting attachment is when you stop having attachment for that person, but they still have attachment for you. Isn't it revolting?
Yeah.
So that's how revolting attachment is. But if you've both got it, you can't see it. That's another discussion now. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. All that craving, the neediness. So to fulfill that sounds very lovely. So how generous of you. How kind of you. That's really practicing generosity. Are we communicating here?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
I'd rather be a nun, okay? I mean, I have to say, I remember I was into sex and drugs and jazz, actually, but I never wanted to live with a person. I thought it was the dumbest thing you'd ever do. I couldn't understand why people want to live together. It was like putting me in prison, So because I didn't want to live with somebody, I didn't want security, it was very evident that the pleasure that came in a relationship, all the misery just didn't make it worthwhile, It was sort of a no-brainer for me. I'm not being... I mean, please, do what you have to do, okay? Anyway, are we communicating a little bit?
Yeah, I think if I understand it, it's because this is our primordial way of being.
We're driven by attachment.
To say that you're just not going to be attached to things
is
impossible.
Anyway, it's impossible.
And will really drive you mad.
It will go mad.
To have that kind of expectation.
It's completely demented to say that. You've got to go gradual. It's like saying you want to play Bach overnight. It's impossible.
Right.
But you've got to go towards it, and that means you've got to understand it. And then the skillful means... Okay, look, very first level of practice is junior school is basically back off and don't follow attachment and don't follow anger. That means calm your mind down, don't have too much sex, drugs and rock and roll, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal. Try and discipline your behaviour, which is driven by attachment and aversion. That's junior school. Now you have the luxury to start looking into your mind and identifying attachment. And that's still the wisdom wing, and the best way to do that is go up to the mountains, and go deep into your mind. Then you can afford to go to the compassion wing and start helping others, still given that you've got attachment, but you can learn to cultivate compassion on top of it. It's level, according to our levels,
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yes, thank you.
And then, of course, you get to Vajrayana, the highest, most sophisticated teachings, where you actually consciously engage in an object that triggers attachment because you're so advanced you can utilize that energy. That's way to go, okay? Don't hold your breath for that one. But that one gets us all excited. Who else? This gentleman, somebody here somewhere. Yes, here, sweetheart, here. This lady right here.
Oh, right.
Yes.
It's hard to go from sex into this
Okay,
conversation,
darling.
but okay. I wouldn't care about how I get my coffee and whatever, but I do get really,
A
really.
bit closer to the mic for the people.
It is a very physical kind of reaction that I get to like inequities in life. That is just as real to me.
I understand.
You do understand? Okay.
You're about seeing suffering in the world. you mean.
Suffering, inequities, class systems,
Yes,
how things are
of
not
course,
fair,
darling.
things not being fair. I don't know. I wasn't born with the contract that things were going to be
You must have been
fair.
born the year of the dog. Were you born the year of the dog?
No, I think rabbit, and
Oh.
I'm a Capricorn. Are you a Taurus?
No, I'm a Sagittarius.
Oh, okay. No, because you like. I mean, I saw the directness. So,
Okay.
Okay. But
So, this is called compassion. Okay, it's called compassion, darling. Isn't that marvelous?
But I didn't have to work at it. I mean, it's
What?
an innate thing.
That's because you
in
practiced
me.
it before, sweetie pie. That's all.
In
You came
another-
with it.
Okay.
Well,
But-
Buddha would say there's no other reason you got it. Didn't come out of
But
nowhere.
I mean, my gift is also what I suffer from, and it's just as physical.
Okay.
I just want to say one thing.
Yeah, go.
It would be just. I would not get all physical and all worked up about how I'd get my coffee. Never.
I understand
It just
that.
wouldn't be- and I'm not,
I understand,
and
darling.
it's not because I practice anything. It's just in me.
Yes.
But when I see inequities, of
Okay.
things not being fair, or people going
Okay.
after people, it makes me.
Shall I give you the Buddhist explanation of it?
Sure, and I'm really interested being here this weekend for tools of what to
darling?
do. Tools.
Okay,
like
listen.
real
but
thing. of
The
what
Buddhist
you do.
explanation is like this. Okay, what's your name? May I know your
My
name?
name is Diane. Is that what you said?
Yeah, your name.
Diane.
Okay, Diane. This is a little kind of explanation from the Buddhist perspective. There you are, you're born as a human being. Due to past practice of compassion, in this life you have a natural tendency to have empathy for people who suffer. Basically, put it that way, yeah?
And animals.
They're called people
big
as well.
animals.
They're called people as well.
Okay.
But what about the insects and the rats and the cockroaches? You have compassion for them too?
Yeah, actually, I
Well, not
I
bad.
can't use glue traps. I have heart traps, and I take them and put them out.
Good, very good. So the Buddhist view would be you must have practiced first of all in the context of keeping vows of morality in a past life. You've got a very strong imprint to not kill and to have compassion. Fantastic. But he would also say if you suffer because when you see suffering, that's not because of compassion. You don't suffer because of your gift. You suffer because you have attachment. Because attachment runs side by side with our virtuous actions at the moment. So so there you are with your compassion. It's under the heading called virtuous. Then you have the other heading called negative, and we've all got that unless you're a highly realized being. So then the attachment think of attachment as a part of you, we've all got it, is a junkie to get what it wants. Now, as you just suggested, you don't care much about the coffee or that kind of thing. That's great. But attachment only wants the nice things. It's a junkie that only wants the nice things. So there you've got that. And then alongside that, you have huge compassion that wants people to be happy and doesn't want them suffering. So when you see the suffering, your compassion, you empathize, but the attachment gets upset, and that's called anger. So that's why you suffer. In other words, you don't suffer because of a compassion, darling. You suffer like the rest of us because attachment doesn't get what it wants. In this case, to have the world lovely.
Right.
And I'm not being mean here. That's why I remember from being an old radical lefty, I had enormous compassion for the world, but I had so much attachment. So when I was a hippie, I had compassion for all whatever. When I was a lefty, I was compassion for all the poor people. So I hated all the rich people. Then I had compassion for all the black people. So I had anger towards all the white people, and then I had compassion for all the female people, and I hated all the male people. We're always going to find to dislike the cause of it. So we're going to have compassion for that animal, but we're going to get mad at the person who harmed it. That's the way we have our compassion these days. And the Buddha's view would be it's limited compassion. So you can lessen the attachment, get rid of the anger, and then you'll have total compassion. And you'll never get upset, and you'll never stop for as long as time exists wanting to work for others. They call that the bodhisattva path. Are we communicating?
We're communicating, but I'm just.
What, darling?
We're communicating.
Good.
However, like the other day, I saw a deer that had got hit by a car. I mean, for days I could not function. I mean, I.
But are you hearing what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I'm just saying I can't imagine the time where I wouldn't be attached to.
No, you're hearing attachment as something good.
What was that?
You're thinking attachment's something good. You're thinking if you've given up attachment, you won't care if the deer gets hurt.
Maybe.
No, that's not being said at all. No, Diane, the opposite. You'd have infinite compassion for the deer, but the point is, because the Buddhist view about karma, you'd know why the deer is suffering, and you wouldn't have a panic attack, and you'd never lose the plot ever, because you know why the deer is suffering, and you won't ever give up trying to help. That's how the Dalai Lama. Have you noticed the Dalai Lama? Have you noticed him at all ever? The last 60 years.
What?
Dalai Lama.
What about?
You know who I'm talking about?
Yes.
You know he looks like a happy guy. Have you noticed he looks like a happy guy? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I guess.
We're smiling,
I've seen him,
cracking jokes.
Yeah.
Have you noticed about how bad his country is? More than 1.5 million of the 6 million Tibetans still being killed. His country destroyed, the wildlife destroyed, the animals destroyed, the minerals ripped out. Unbelievable despair, that country. But have you noticed he's not having a mental breakdown about it? Because you could argue he's only got compassion and he's given up the delusion. So he never gives up in every way, keeping perky and optimistic, no matter how bad it gets. So the reason we get despairing when bad things happen is not because of attachment, is because of not because of a compassion, because of attachment. It's a brand new way of us thinking. We don't think like this. It needs looking into carefully. Because the Buddha's saying when you've given up attachment and anger, your compassion will grow limitlessly. Limitless compassion. But it won't be sort of yucky, sentimental, oh my God, this is so terrible compassion. Not like that. It'll be optimistic and you'll have tears, but you'll never give up working for others. Your heart will break for others.
I get it.
Are you with me?
I'm committed.
And you'll even have more compassion for the harmers. That's the test of real compassion.
Okay, I get it.
Do you understand, darling?
I do.
Someone else? Yes. Behind, the gentleman behind. Behind there. He's been very patient for 25 minutes.
It's true. Don't you think that uncontrolled passion and uncontrolled jealousy can sometimes conceive also beautiful things?
Uncontrolled, which one?
Attachment.
Something good could come out of it, you think?
Yes.
You can say. Give an example.
The Moonlight Sonata.
The who?
Moonlight Sonata.
But that doesn't have to be attachment.
Judging Beethoven, he was very angry and he was very, his mind wasn't in place. And then he directed his feeling to the music. So to what extent one should work on these feelings? I feel like if everybody would be as compassionate as Buddha, we would live, and I'm sorry to say it, guys, in a boring world. I mean, maybe we would be born to a world where we're used to it, but right now,
I understand.
What I mean?
Okay, so look, okay. Have you ever, okay. Okay. You can, I absolutely understand what you're saying. But the point about attachment, as I said before, the way attachment functions, especially like in relation to people, if we're in love with somebody, we all know there's incredible blissful feelings of joy. Would you agree? Okay, that's because of attachment as well as empathy. But attachment is the one that causes the blissful feelings in the body because we have these desire bodies. But the point about attachment, it does trigger very good feelings, and it can even be with music and art as well. But the point that with attachment the Buddha's making, and that's why we have to think about it carefully, as attachment keeps going, let's say I'm in love with you, bliss in the beginning, we all know that, and then we move in together. We all know eventually it'll become less exciting. Have you ever found that to be true? It becomes less exciting. Would you agree? The object of attachment becomes, and eventually even you'll look at me one day and you'll think, God, who's this ugly looking thing in my bed? And you'll throw me out and bring in a new one. Have you noticed how attachment changes?
My wife is right there. I can't...
Okay. So the point is, attachment is like a honey-covered razor blade. And it's true, even you could argue, all the amazing creativity in our world is from attachment, because attachment has a function of embellishing things and making them more exciting. But the downside of attachment, okay, when you see the world full of despair and murder and rape and torture, have you noticed the world?
Yes.
The Buddha would say that's because of anger. And anger is only there because attachment was there. So if you can have attachment without anger, then go for it, baby. It's fine. Because when we see the big picture, Buddha's philosophical view of the universe, and it goes into quite subtle detail, anger is directly linked to attachment.
Yeah.
So if you see that, one has to look into it more carefully and find a way to extract the good. So I think of you can even think of a person, let's say, is very good at music, but has got a lot of craving and attachment, and the music is like really gross music. It kind of drives the craving. Whereas I always think of Bach, for example. I mean, he's churning out his toccatas and his whatever, Lord knows what, every day. This genius creative mind. Do you understand? But it also seemed to be mixed with virtue, though. So you're going to have a virtuous, compassionate, wise person who's got a very skillful, creative mind that isn't destructive, that's the attachment part, the creative part. So you can mix it with virtue, that capability.
Yeah.
One has to lift it up, and join it with virtue, not garbage. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Thank you.
Time to go home, maybe. Is it? Yes.
Hi.
Yes.
So I wrote down my questions, so it'll be
Yes.
brief. For those of us in the room who choose to exercise consciousness and seek wisdom, if forming equanimity is the goal in rough circumstances such as...
I missed the last sentence.
If forming equanimity is the goal in rough circumstances such as a challenging family member, a verbally abusive boss, a bad business partner, what are some signs as to whether you're in the company of V prime growth opportunity? That, they say out of the worst things in life, you bounce back and grow the most, versus when to jump ship. So for example, if someone has a bad boss, a bad boss meaning they keep out seeking tools.
Sweetheart, I understand totally what you're saying, yes. You know what? It's a question of your own capability. So if you're as capable as Lance Armstrong, you'll take the highest mountains. If you're not, you're going to kill yourself.
So if one's capabilities are growing.
You've got to know your mind. You've got to know your own capability. So, so I'd like to put it this way. There's the wisdom wing approach and the compassion wing approach. So there you are in a relationship, whether it's a partner or a boss. And you're checking this relationship, and this boss is a creep, maybe being mean to you, making life tough, but you check yourself and you think, am I learning something about this? Am I developing more patience? Am I developing my skills? Then you could even say, this is okay for me for the moment, I can handle this. But if you see this this person's abusing you and brutalizing you, and you are a victim and you can't get any growth from it, I'd suggest you have the courage to leave.
Well, that's
You've got to know your own mind.
So one questions oneself, especially whenever they're chasing all the wisdom out there. They question whether leaving when they have the option to press a button is wise in and of itself, because the same situation in another color, in another form, will inevitably arise.
Darling,
so why give up that growth opportunity?
Because you've got to know your own mind, what is most wise. Every single situation is different. If in general we're really trying to know our own mind, which means lessen delusions, lessen attachment, lessen anger, lessen jealousy, lessen depression, then it might be the wisest choice. Another time it might be, like I just said, you leave immediately, including that close relationship. You have to know your own mind. There's no external answer. You've got to know what's right for your mind at that time. And that's not a mysterious thing.
So
that's a technical point.
So in other words, knowing your own mind is of greater importance than looking out for signs out there in the world.
What do you mean signs in the world? They're talking about inner signs.
Signs as in, okay, if you see X and Y, or X, Y, and Z.
I don't understand X and Y. Speak normal. Forgive me. I can't understand X and Y.
I don't have a particular example, but I just think that perhaps...
So I'm missing your point then, what you're saying. What are you're suggesting, if you're in a job and the boss is lousy, and it's difficult for... Wait, please let me finish. And it's difficult for you, but you're saying you want to look for an external sign. The external is not the point. It's the internal that's the point. Your boss can be whoever he wants. It's up to what you want to get from that. That's your decision. You are the boss there. He can be as mean as he likes. You can grow hugely from that job if you decide to. But another time you might not be able to, so you say, goodbye, I'm leaving. It's not an external sign you need. It's an internal.
you answered my question at the very end. It's what you're trying to, what are you trying to get out of the relationship? If you meet that and you discover new ways of getting something out of the relationship, then it's worth sticking by.
Absolutely, because that's the wisdom wing. But there's also the compassion side. Give him the mic. Keep the mic. There's also an example I always use. This is the compassion side now. Whatever's beneficial for the other person. So that's a tough one. So there's a friend of mine who's got an alcoholic husband. He's a quiet drunk. He goes to work, he brings in the money, he takes care of the wife, the grandchildren. He's a good, kind man, but he drinks himself to oblivion every night. So that's a drag for a person to have in a relationship. So the normal one is you get angry, you try to get him to stop drinking alcohol, you fight, you demand, you feel sorry for yourself, you complain to your sister and your mother. Well, she made a decision that it was best for her to stay in the relationship. So she chose that. And now she has a happy life. She goes where she wants, she has her own life, and she realized it was the best for everybody. But because she chose it, she's happy. So we have to be the person who chooses it. If it's right for me right now in this crappy boss, I choose to be there. As soon as we choose it, you have power and control.
Thank you so much.
Okay. We're the boss, you know. Somebody else before we go home? Yes? Yes.
So recently I watched a video from Lama Eshe where he says that romantic love is so gross. I assume that is, of course, because of attachment. And my question is, do you think that someone can be in a romantic relationship and get enlightened? Because I don't think it's possible.
Why do you ask get enlightened? Why don't you just say change their mind, be humble? Honey, listen, I mean, please, enlightened, you know, it's a big ask. If we understand, taking Buddha's model, if we understand what he means by attachment and how attachment causes suffering, if we begin to understand that, then you'll know the answer. You'll know yourself the answer. So it's all, again, repeating here, it's all a question of your level of capability. For God's sake. I mean, this question is so ridiculous in a way. I mean, have you noticed, you know, in a relationship, you live close with a person. I mean, I don't want to go into it even. There's no point. If you understand what attachment is, and if you don't, then you can't answer the question. So just keep looking, darling, is all I can say.
Thank you.
I mean, it's a huge point, this so-called romantic relationship. But I mean, I know what I sound depressing, but like I said before, have you ever been in love with have you ever had somebody who's in love with you and you're not in love with them? Has that ever happened?
Yes.
Isn't it disgusting? Isn't it revolting? They're like creepy and crawly, aren't they? All over you, like a rash, and you wish they'd go away. Have you ever had that experience?
I actually don't feel like that when someone...
Well, you're just very kind, that's all. Has anybody else Has anybody else recognized what I'm saying? So that's raw attachment when it's not being reciprocated. It's lovely when you've both got it. I'm just being a bit gross here, but get my point. Mm-hmm. When this person is completely obsessed with you, it's called stalking you. You bring the police in. That's the pain of attachment. So all I'm saying is when we see attachment in a gross form, you'll understand it. That doesn't mean that you can't have a good relationship. Be friends with each other. And that means every day, everybody I speak to who's got a halfway decent relationship, the main point isn't the bloody attachment, it's not the sex, it's compromising, being patient, doing what they want, you know, letting them fart in the sheets if they want to, not criticizing them, going to the movie they want to go to, every minute compromising. That's a profound practice. I admire you, I'm not capable. Are you communicating with me? If you want that, then go for it. I'm really happy for you. I would also say I want to have freedom to do exactly what I want. So it's whatever you want in life, people. Are we communicating a bit?
Yes, yes.
I mean, if you want 14 babies and a person in the same bed, honey, go for it. It's a question of what you want, you know. I'm not trying to be showing off or anything. But I remember when I was a little girl, as soon as I went to Mass, I knew it was my job. My job was going to be the priest, you know, not the nun, the priest. I always wanted to be the boss. So, I mean, I always just knew I wanted, I know it sounds so kind of arrogant, I wanted truth and freedom. More than anything, I wanted this. So that's determined my choices in life. You know, one of my sisters, we're very harmonious. We're really harmonious, the 7 siblings. But one of my sisters got slightly drunk one day. The mouth got a bit loose, you know. So she figured that I was borderline Asperger's. Because using these Western words, which I don't buy into. Because why? I don't have one family. I don't have any photos of family on my mantelpiece. I don't even have a mantelpiece. I don't have possessions. I don't have beloveds. I don't have children, you know. So I must be lonely. Do you understand?
Yes.
So we've got to look at our assumptions, what we want, what drives us, you know. Of course you can get enlightened. I think you can get enlightened really well in a relationship if you really practice hard. Isn't it?
Yes.
But look at, unfortunately, and this is not against men, but you know that 40% of all females on earth who get killed, you know who kills them, don't you?
Yes.
The person in the same bed. I mean, this says something, the downside about attachment. It's dangerous, is all I'm saying. I mean, I remember reading, you know, in Vanity Fair, they always have this cracky, I read Vanity Fair, and they have these funny-looking questionnaires. And one questionnaire was, you know, where are you most afraid? And one of the biggest percentages was in the bad neighbourhoods. Well, I thought they're not looking at their own house. 40% of all women get murdered in their own home. That's the bad neighbourhood. I mean, it's not being cynical or anything. If we get the big picture and understand what it is and see the downside, then of course we'll practice giving it up. And that's what the practice is. That's profound. I mean,
And
go for
that
it.
was exactly my point, because as I practice more, at least from my own experience, I feel like I want actually to give it up, because I don't feel like I'll be able to practice and be with someone else as well.
I understand that. That's great. It's fine. It's all against the question what you want. So if you want to go off and get some single point of concentration, you've got to become a nun or a monk. You can't do that married. You've got to have 10, 12 hours a day, several years of total silence. So it's a question of what your goal is. It's a question of what your goal is, you know, is what you choose, isn't it?
Yes.
And there's a multitude of goals, you know. I think it's time to go to bed. Okay? So we finished now, unless there are more urgent questions. No? Sorry. Okay. So we do a little prayer to finish, and we'll carry on tomorrow and the next day. We're going to go into more details about the suffering of attachment. We're going to rub our noses in it, okay? And look at emptiness and the self and all these things and get a bit excited and see if there's some tools we can take. So tonight, you know, we've been here nearly 2 hours. We can say, you know, there's an awful lot of words been said and ideas and thoughts. Every one of us, we take what we've got from this. We're the boss, not Buddha. Please keep thinking that. So anything at all tonight that's been useful, even 1% of it, take that, put it into practice, use it as a tool. You know, Buddha doesn't own this stuff. He just runs with it, that's all. So, you know, use the tools to help us basically develop our own amazing potential. So never give up on your own potential. This is something that's really huge, you know. This is the first stages of spiritual practice for yourself, to really develop your own marvelous potential. That means potential to give up neediness, to give up attachment, to give up jealousy, to give up fears, to give up low self-esteem. That's what it means. So that we can become this marvelous person that we've got that's just sitting there waiting to be uncovered, so we can help others do the same. We all live in this boat together, you know. Kewadinyu dudag lama sangye drubgyune drowa chikyang malupa deisala gopashok Jangchob semchog rinpoche ma kiepa nam kegyochig kiepa nyampa me payang gong ne gong du peba shok. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.